All right, hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Verdict of the Ancient Kings. This is episode 6, Call for a Mistrial, and I'm running out of ideas for names for these episodes. So if you guys have ideas, definitely let me or Nico know, and I guess you can be remembered for 5 minutes as someone who named Verdict of the Ancient Kings. Anyways, just a quick recap of what we're going to be going over today. Puzzle results from last week, VIP weekend results, a little bit of talk of PvE with Nico, talking about Champions Unlimited, and the new puzzle. Once again, I am not going to be alone in my cast today. Alongside me is going to be Nico. Nico, how are you doing?
Good, great, and yeah, I'm excited to talk a little bit about PvE for the first time on this podcast, and we will we'll look into some very cool things with a new puzzle and the crazy results of the old puzzle.
Yeah, talk about crazy results. When you said that you were gonna open up and like let people figure out what those cards were, I looked up the cards. I'm like, could there possibly be more than one solution to this puzzle? And I think the definitive answer to that one is a resounding yes. There is more than one solution. Is that right?
Yeah, there are hundreds of solutions. In fact, it's pretty funny because before our last podcast when we were going to share the puzzle, I thought, oh, you know what? Maybe we shouldn't share the cards because that'd be way too easy for people to figure out the combination to use them in. And I said, oh, why don't we just let people guess what the cards are? And that was a horrible idea because there are so many possibilities. Um, so I guess I'll just talk a little bit about the solution. And before I opened up the floodgates, um, the solution to the puzzle, like there are quite a few solutions, but there's two things I like to call the seventh gate and the eighth gate. I like to think of like Rock Lee from Naruto, when they open up the special powers of the seventh and eighth gate and really start to go off. And that's basically what the seventh gate and the eighth gate does for this puzzle. So the seventh gate is an ambush guide, or oh god, what's the other guys? The flash. I had it up in front of me a second ago. It's like a flash pot elder.
Flash pot elder gives invincibility. Yeah.
So those two cards they open up the realm of possibilities to play all these other troops. The ambush guide allows you to play things like a buccaneer or any other 3-drop or lower, and the flashpot elder basically allows you to play any 2-drop or less because one of the restrictions to the puzzle was you have basically 8 resources to play 2 troops, and then 2 of the other cards are 1-cost actions.
Mm-hmm.
So the eighth gate, or what I'm calling the eighth gate, is either a Hextricator or a the Duskwing Shepherd, because both of those cards allow you to go into any other threshold you want, and then that allows you to play all these other combos, like you can play Burn or you can play a Wild Growth. So that's what I'm calling the eighth gate. So basically, there are just hundreds of answers to the puzzle. 2 people actually submitted so many answers. They're trying to go for like that first place and plug to Audens, and the other individual that sent me a ton of answers was Arnie, and I'm totally blanking on I think your account name is Amos Pottle. So both of you guys win packs. Audens actually figured out the exact same solution that I had originally intended for the puzzle, which was the Flashpot Elder. You play that first, then you follow that by the Duskwing Shepherd, and you follow that with a Totem Trap on the Rampaging Tarrasque, and then you block the Shark with the Duskwing Shepherd, you block the Cerebus with either one, and you block the Druze with either one, and then you sacrifice the Duskwing Shepherd to get a Diamond Threshold, and you play a Noble Heart on the troop blocking the Druze.
Of
So
course,
that was
yeah.
like the crazy solution that I wanted people to come up with before we opened up the floodgates. And Auden's actually came up with that. So he is getting a bonus prize from me, which is going to be one of the legendaries from the combo. I think it's going to be an augur. I just need to double check my collection.
All
so
right.
Congratulations. And then I have one other pack I'm sending to a random individual that submitted a bunch of entries based on random.org, which is, let me double check your name, Bloodfort you in a pack. So congratulations to everyone that submitted answers. I'm sorry there were so many solutions. Some of you were confused because it was too easy, but I guarantee you our next puzzle will be a little bit more challenging.
Well, the next puzzle, like, I'm not 100% sure there is only one answer. Like, we worked very diligently to get to that, but we'll have to see. I'm sure some of the people who are listening on the podcast, who are watching this on YouTube, are going to go straight to the end and then look at it and go, oh, okay. But yeah, hopefully the next puzzle is a little bit more challenging. Now, over the past weekend, there was the first sealed VIP using only Hero Fall. And just looking at the number of 4-win decks out there, I wanted to get like a really good gauge of what decks were really, really popular. And without really diving into every single deck possible, and I just wanted to see, okay, let me see all of the 4-win decks out there that was up on Hex Meta. And out of the 29, first place 4 wins, 4 wins that we had throughout the weekend, are you surprised to hear that 24 of those decks had diamonds and 21 of those had rubies?
No, not at all. I mean, I can definitely attribute that to Valor and the oh god, why am I forgetting the name of it? Not the Tempest, but the Blood Diamond troop that gets
Ardent Officer, the one that attacks and gives +2/+1.
No, oh my god, the Twilight Revenant. That's
Oh, okay. Then Diamond Blood. I thought you said Diamond.
Yeah, Diamond Blood. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's why I'm attributing Diamond to actually having a few more picks than Ruby
Mm-hmm.
for the 4-0s.
All right. So, like, what can you tell us about the meta? I heard that you did play in 3 VIPs. I played in one. I was lucky or unlucky enough to go 3-1 in my event, so I got some packs back and I got my alternate art cards. I ended up running, I believe, Diamond Ruby as well. What did you run?
So for the very first VIP I played in, I ended up going 3-1. I lost the first round. Every one of my games was a mirror match against Diamond Ruby. So that's pretty telling right there. Valor is just all over the place. It's one of the better decks and easier decks to build. And it's consistently putting pressure on your opponent. The combos between the cards are so good. So I saw a lot of that in the first round. The second time I actually played a Blood Ruby deck. I had 3 of the Brute Crown Bashers, and I had 4 of the Brute Crown Bashers. So I was like, oh man, I should really try to play with this card, and it ended up going okay. I think I went 2-2 in that one. And the last one I played, oh gosh, I played a tricolor. I think it was Ruby Diamond Wild, and I didn't do so hot. I went 1-3, and I went up against a lot of both Diamond, Blood, Ruby, and Diamond Blood decks. The 3 colors that were played the most with 4-0 wins.
All right, so for some of the guys out there who played in a lot of sealed and see Diamond and Ruby and say, okay, those are the most powerful decks out there, would you suggest doing the same exact thing for, say, drafts, and why or why not?
I'd say no. For draft, you really need to look at what's open and go for something that you think is not going to be picked a lot, because Sapphire and Wild in draft sometimes are wide open, and you can get a lot more synergy from the cards you pick in a draft than you can in a VIP sealed or Evo pool. So you really want to go for that synergy based on what you're seeing come around the table. And Sapphire and Wild have great cards too. It's just, will you get enough of them? And usually the case is in sealed and in Evo, you don't get enough of the cards you really need to make a strong deck around.
Yeah, I've been noticing that as well. A lot of my evos, I think there's one evo or one gauntlet where I actually ran Blood Sapphire, and I went 5-0. It was, and what was even more crazy, I think I showed you this pool. The Diamond Ruby pool had a Hero of Legend and an Ardent Crusader, but the synergy on Blood and Sapphire, even though it is difficult to find, you can often find it, and you can do some amazing things. So from what I've seen, if you in sealed, it's easy to go diamond ruby just because there's so many commons and some powerful uncommons that really utilize valor really well. But the blood, the sapphire, and the wild combos are a little bit harder to pull off. But they can sometimes be passed around to you in draft, and I think that's what you were trying to get at.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I totally agree.
All right, so with all of that VIP results, let's go ahead and move on to, well, PVE. PVE is something that Nico, if you guys did not know, does write for the Hex TCG main site, and he does a great job just coming up with these interesting decks and trying to run with them both in the Frost Ring Arena and in the campaign. What are you going to be focusing on today?
So I thought I'd just talk about some of the new set 5 cards and cards in particular that have very good equipment that I think people should pay attention to. So one of those cards that I've just started experimenting with tonight actually is called Caliban's Cultivation, which is a 2-cost wild card that says target troop gets, when you gain wild threshold, transform this into a random troop with cost +1. Well, it has legendary equipment for it. That's a head equipment that says when you play it, all troops in play get, when you gain wild threshold, transform this into a troop with cost +1. So if you play that with a very synergistic deck, like you're playing Howling Braves, you're playing Wellsprings, playing Dread Harvest, maybe even Wild Brute Dancers with equipment to get multiple wild thresholds into play, you can transform your troops super quickly into maybe like a 1-cost battle hopper, which is what I was abusing it with, into a 5 or even 7 or 9-cost troop within 1 or 2 turns. So it's actually super fun to play with. So that's one of the cards I wanted to mention. There's a few other cards I'm interested in, but maybe I'll wait, and after I mention a card, I'll ask you if you have any questions about it.
All right. I wish, like, I'm looking at, I'm trying to remember the Caliban's Cultivation. So is it a constant or is it a single action that targets one particular troop?
So it's normally a single action that just targets a normal troop in play. And so that text, the text that when you gain a wild threshold, it goes onto that troop. So every time the troop transforms, it still has that text on it saying when you gain a wild threshold. So when you play it with the equipment, it just goes on all of your troops in play.
So
it's a permanent modifier.
So I'm assuming you've been pairing it with like battle hoppers and maybe even dreadlings, since dreadlings can be generated so easily.
Yeah, dreadlings are my next task with it because I am actually playing 4 Dread Harvests in this deck. So if I play a Wild Threshold, I'll get a Dreadling, but unfortunately that's also kind of counterintuitive to playing Caliban's Cultivation because I'm playing the Shard first. So maybe I'll build a second deck with more Dreadling generation to kind of make the combo go even crazier.
And are you trying this in the Frost Ring Arena, or are you trying this more on the campaign side?
I'm trying in the Frost Ring Arena for now, but I think it could be pretty good in an elf-themed deck because a lot of the troops I'm playing in this deck are elves, and they also allow you to play more rares. So Elfin campaign could probably make this work as well.
All right, well, I look forward to whatever crazy article you have with generating random troops. It's always it's always fun, especially when you do it in the PvE side, because when you start generating random troops in PvE, you have a much wider range of troops that you can generate. You can actually generate things that the computer is the only person that's supposed to get it. So I think I got a Spitfire Elemental once when I was and you're like, and you're just kind of laughing because we've all we've all been on the wrong end of Victor and that Spitfire elemental, and when it's on your side, you're just kind of laughing and enjoying it a little bit, and you have a good smile on your face. So let me know any of your crazy stories with what you're able to generate, Wormoid Queens or whatever Killipedes and whatnot.
Yeah, I've already. I think I shared some screenshots on our Discord, but I've got a bunch of Wormoid Queens already. I ended up killing off all my troops because I turned like 7 of them into Arguses or something crazy like that. So there's a lot of cool combos you can do with Caliban's cultivation. And I guess I'll mention a few other cards too really quickly. We don't have to spend a lot of time on this. But if you like Dreadlings and you want to kind of abuse that, Skittering Dark has nice chest equipment. Skittering Dark, what it normally does is it creates 2 Dreadlings and puts them into play for 1. But the chest equipment allows you to put 3 of them into play for 1. So it's just a quick way to get a mass amount of little artifact Dreadlings into play, which combos with a lot of stuff. And one of the other cards that I'm enjoying pairing with that is actually called Glyph of Hatred, which is a 0 cost action for blood, and it has a trinket equipment that gives all of the troops in play that ability. And what that ability is Rage 1. So if you're playing a bunch of things on the table, you can play this 0 cost card and get everything in play Rage 1. And just do ridiculous amounts of damage in a single turn, especially if you're playing Dreadlings.
Yeah.
So another fun card to play with in PvE.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have really found the power of rage all of a sudden, especially with the champions that are currently in the pool, and people are like, "Wow, rage is actually really good." Like I'm looking at the glyphs because every single shard has a glyph, and I think what would you say the tiers are? Rage 1 is probably the best of the glyphs, and +1/+1 for 0, maybe one of the weaker ones.
Yeah, it's really hard to say. I would say in the limited setting that maybe the Sapphire one's actually the best because it allows you to give a troop evasion, and evasion's hard to come by in this set for limited play. But for constructed, maybe Ferocity could be the strongest, followed by the Glyph of Hatred for Rage. Because I think Ferocity can catch people off guard. It also can be put on troops that don't normally have speed. That could really increase their power level. And then in PvE, I think Glyph of Hatred, they all the glyphs have trinket equipment that give it to all troops. And I think the strongest one by far is a Glyph of Hatred, which is the one I've been playing around with.
Yeah, so it's one of those things where you do deck experimenting, and you're so, right when Hero Fall came out, everyone was just playing it on all the gauntlets, enjoying it, having a blast. And then you go to the PvE side, and you're like, wait, what equipment do I have? And I guess it's like unwrapping a gift after you've already unwrapped it. You're like, oh, what can I possibly make? This Glyph of Hatred hits all of my troops, and you're like a kid in a candy store with a fresh set of eyes, just enjoying everything.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of fun ways you can expand the sandbox of Hex. Like, you don't have to think in only PvP setting, and I really look forward to more of the PvE content so that we can continue to expand that sandbox. And maybe we'll touch on PvE more in the future, but just a tip of the iceberg kind of things I'm looking into now. My next article actually is going to be focused around Dreadlings and Shroomkin. So if you like Shroomkin and Dreadlings, that's something to look forward to. I think it will come out next week on Monday.
All right. Well, moving right along, and I wanted to highlight the 8 popular limited champions that have been gracing us in Heroes Fall. I'm not quite sure how many champions there are in total, but I think these 8 are perhaps the ones that you'll most likely see throughout your Evo Gauntlet runs, your Seal Gauntlet runs, and even your draft runs. And it's not because it's mainly because of the current card combinations. And I think one of the articles said it best, where when you were drafting Army of Myth and Primal Dawn, you primarily drafted bombs. You drafted the most powerful card that you saw, and you played it, and it was almost like its own standalone card. With Hero Fall, Valor, Dreadling, Scrounge, all of those mechanics really, really require a lot more synergy. Ardent Allegiance, Underworld Allegiance with the Mortar Trike or the Lava Shaper. There was a lot more decision in drafting, and you couldn't always take necessarily the biggest, most highest value troop. And with that, the champions change as well. So, what do you want to tell us, or what would you say are the tiers for all of the champions?
Yeah, so I think there is a tier 1, which is actually all of those champions on your bottom row.
Mm-hmm.
I would say all of those are like tier 1. Josephina, our guild was talking about this earlier. Like, we have people that prefer Lysander, that's right next to Josephina, the bottom right two.
Mm-hmm.
Lysander being the elf. With Ruby faction, 3 cost basic charge power that gives you a Valor when you deal damage to opposing champion.
Mm-hmm.
He's very good in, or she is very good in aggressive. You're able to deal damage quickly and just kind of perpetuate the board state that you already have by making it stronger. And there's already so many cards that combo with Valor.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Josephina is a 4 charge, a little bit slower, but she completely locks down a treat for your turn and then their turn. So it allows you to get an attack in. It also prevents them from attacking, so it kind of buys you a turn. And she also has 25 health versus Lysander's 21.
Mm-hmm.
So I really see those two as the strongest 2 champions for a Diamond Ruby Valor based deck.
Mm-hmm.
And then probably right alongside those 2 champions is, and I'm totally blanking on his name, the guy that gives rage.
It's Gorn, right? Or Grom?
Grom. Yeah, I think it's Grom.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I could be wrong. I need to double check in the builder here, but he gives rage for 3. So you give rage to a Twilight Revenant, and you're right, it was Gorn of the Hell Pits. So you give that thing rage, and then all of a sudden you're gaining life. You can't be killed, and you're putting your opponent on a clock to either have a void mechanic or a negative health mechanic to take out that Revenant, or they lose.
Yeah, I really like Gorn just because it is in the Blood Shard, and Blood naturally pairs well a little bit with Ruby. No, excuse me, a little bit with Ruby, a little bit with Diamond, and a little bit with Sapphire as well. All of those have ways to get some evasion. Blood naturally already has evasion with the minor gem that says you cannot block unless you have an attack greater than or equal to this particular troops, and there is that what the Blackfire source, or the 3-drop 3/1 with the minor socket. You put rage on that, and all of a sudden on turn 4 you're swinging with a 4/1, and if your opponent doesn't have anything to block, it's just going to be a continuing growing threat that is often unblockable. So that can get out of hand. I've even won a game where I played 1 troop the entire game, and it was a Jet Cadet, but it had rage 2, and that was it. So turn 2, Jet Cadet was on the table. Turn 3, gave it rage. Turn 5, I had bounced a troop back into his hand and had an extra charge and gave it rage 2, and it dealt enough damage by turn 6. So yeah, Gorn is I would say just below Lysander and Josephina, but still very, very strong.
Yeah, I totally agree, and you're exactly spot on about the evasion mechanics. And I agree that also in Diamond you have the flight when they attack, so that's another evasion mechanic that's perfect. And Ruby doesn't really need evasion because they have so much burn that they can just remove troops to light the path and get in damage. But yeah, he's great. I actually would rate him on par with Lysander and Josephina just because he's so good, but it's harder to get the right commons and uncommons
Mm-hmm.
in blood to make that more playable.
Mm-hmm. All right.
And
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 finally, you said
finally,
Wild
you
Shaper.
yeah, Wild Shaper, go ahead.
Wild Shaper is Wild Shaper is for the adventurous player because you don't quite know what you're gonna get. I mean, I've had Wild Shaper. If you guys don't know what he does, his hero power takes 5 charges, so it is really expensive. But you transform target troop you control into a random troop with cost +2. So your 4 drop becomes a random 6 drop. Your 5 drop becomes a random 7 drop, and for a single target, that can become a very, very big threat all of a sudden. But at the same time, you can also have a very big miss. I believe um, I had transformed a 6 drop into a 0/0 Kraken in one of my games, and 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 all you can do is just like you just kind of sigh because the Kraken, for anyone who hasn't played Shards of Fate, it's a 0/0, but when it comes into play, it creates 8 tentacles and it has +1/+1 for each tentacle in play. Well, if you transform a troop into a Kraken, there's no tentacles in play, and the Kraken just withers away and dies, and we use 5 charge powers and nothing. But at the same time, I've also seen a 5 drop turn into a Storm Colossus, which was what, a 6/6 flight spell shield, and you're like, okay, there's no way I'm going to be able to deal with that. So I think it's very, very high risk, high reward, but there isn't a lot of wild cards. There isn't a lot of wild decks out there in limited, and that may be the reason why we don't see Wild Shaper that much.
Yeah, it is definitely an RNG champion, and the reward for the risk usually outweighs the risk itself. I think it's perfect when you have 3 or 4 5 drops that have like a come into play effect but aren't that strong by themselves, like
Mm.
the 4/3 artifact major socketed troop, especially great with wild because you can have it create a troop when it
Mm-hmm.
comes into play, and then you can immediately transform it into a 7 drop.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sometimes we get like a Prophet of Lodogan or the 3/3 elf that usually gives other elves in play crush and ++ damage.
Mm-hmm.
But those are some of the worst 7 drop hits. You can also get, like you said, a Storm Colossus or a Darmac or some other crazy 7 drop, like a Uranaz, which I've actually hit on occasion. So that risk is usually paid out in a pretty good reward if you're playing a few 5 drops. And like you said, he's one of the only few choices you have for wild. So if you have a pretty good wild pool, even if you're playing another primary color like ruby or diamond, I sometimes consider playing him if I'm worried I don't have a bomb strong enough to finish the game.
Yeah, and that really is what it boils down to, whether or not you think you have a bomb. Also, I will say one thing that gives the Wild Shaper a little bit more juice is the 2 cost basic action survival of the fittest. That also gives you a charge. So I'm not sure if a lot of people notice this, but I believe every single shard has an action that gives you a charge. Crackling or overcharge, I believe, is the diamond one. But the battling troop, one of the primary ways that wild has as creature removal also gives charges as well. So normally you wouldn't expect to be able to use Wild Shaper's ability more than once in a limited game. With that additional charge, you can sometimes pull it off twice, and that could be your second bomb late game to try to gain a little bit of traction as well.
Yeah, yeah. It's just those 4 champions are great. I mean, I guess we can jump to the 4 on top. They are still pretty good. Like Renner, the very first one on top left, allows you to take a card from your opponent's deck, which is kind of on par with Wild Shaper in a way where maybe you take their bomb out of their deck, but you also are kind of doing something a little frustrating to them. And if you're playing some of those crackling cards as well, as you mentioned, you can use his charge power a little bit before turn 5 and maybe get a threat that you can play. It changes that card's threshold for you, so
Mm-hmm.
it's definitely playable if you're in blood.
Yeah, it's also a little bit more demoralizing because you don't know what your opponent took, and sometimes you're like, even if he took a shard, I needed that shard that I'm never gonna get. So it's a little bit of a mental game as well, and sometimes all you need is your opponent to be on tilt just a little bit for you to get it out.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And then the guy next to him, Elijah, I think that's his name. He's pretty fun. I mean, he doesn't really have the same impact that Rutherford Banks does because you can put any troop right back into play for 7,
Hmm.
but his charge is only 4, and you get to put a was it 2 cost or less back into your hand.
Yeah,
So with some of the bombs in Diamond and Ruby that are only 2 cost, like even the 2/1 Swift Strike that gives you a Valor, or some troop that you've been pumping with Valor the entire game, there's some very nice synergy with those kind of Valor combos.
yeah. On top of that, there's also those troops that work with assault where you can lower the cost. So
Oh yeah.
the relentless, it's the actual alternate art card from the VIP. I'm forgetting its name right now. The 8-drop 5/5 flight. It has assault, so you can actually get its cost down to 2. So sometimes you'll just be blindly attacking with things like, hey, I have a 0/1 gust mage. I'm gonna attack, and your opponent's like, okay, he has some assault thing that I have to be aware of. And if you can get any of those bombs, the 7-drop 4/6 necrotic warrior as well.
Yeah.
If you can
Yeah,
get
he
that,
worked.
yeah, if you can get that down to 2, being able to grab a 4/6 from the crypt, get it into your hand, play it for 2, maybe even play it for free after it gets into your hand. That can change the game dramatically since it has such high defense that it can pretty much block with anything to start removing threats from the board.
Yeah, that is a really good point. Yeah, the Righteous Vanquisher would be a perfect target for that. So it's usually pretty easy to get low.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the next guy, 2 Tomahawks, he is more of like the steady state late game champion pick if you have a strong diamond pool. Usually with Ruby, I would say heavy removal,
Mm-hmm.
because a heavy removal pool in Diamond Ruby will allow you to kind of get to that late game state where you can start pumping up maybe the 1 or 2 troops you have in play with Valor until you can put in lethal damage.
Yep. And finally, the Dread Banner, the Blood Spinner. It's 5 cost, double blood threshold. Create a Dread Banner. That Dread Banner creates only 1 Dreadling a turn, but you would primarily only use this if you needed dreadlings for any particular reasons. You're running 3 gruesome deads, or you have a lot of scrounge in your deck that you know you need to be able to trigger effectively, time in and time out. This is one of those cards that will make sure that your crypt is constantly full with troops so that you can continue to do more and more.
Yep, that's exactly what I would say about him too. Just perfect for scrounge and anything that pumps up dreadlings or makes good use of dreadlings.
All right, so those are the 8 limited champions. I'm sure those of you guys out there who saw those champions, if you weren't quite sure which one to use between 2, like I said, we had a discussion between Lysander and Josephina in a Diamond Ruby. You can't really go wrong with either or, but to blindly ask which one is better between the 2, you're not really looking at your pool. So that's really what you need to do at that point. Look at your pool, figure out how you want to play, and then move on from there. Talking about moving on, we are now moving on to our puzzle of the week. This puzzle, I'll just go ahead and read it. Your cards in play are an Avalanche Giant and an Imolith. You have 2 cards in hand, and they are both 7 cost Taste for Blood. You have 7 resources. You have 3 Ruby Threshold, 3 Blood Threshold. Your opponent has 0 resources, 0 blockers, and you need to deal at least 28 damage this turn. Draw 1 card to win. There are 2 cards left in your deck. You have no cards in your crypt. What is the card you need to draw to deal 28 damage? And as a bonus, what is the most damage you can do this turn? Assuming you draw that card to deal at least 28 damage. We think that there is only one solution for this. and hopefully we don't get inundated with like, oh my gosh, this is too,
Hopefully.
yeah. I don't want a repeat of what happened last week with 150 different answers, and I'm sorry, I tried to do as much research on this one after we had posted up the last puzzle. Nico was telling me that he was getting like submission after submission after submission, and some of the people in our Discord was telling me, hey, I found 7 solutions in 2 minutes, and I was just like, oh my gosh, what did we do? So, well, we upped the challenge just a bit this week. So let us know what you guys think. Once again, all submissions go to nicosharp@gmail.com, and let's see if you guys can figure this one out.
Yeah, good luck. Hopefully this can stump some of you for a while.
All right. Well, from all of us here from me and Nico and everyone, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the gauntlets and the arenas.